So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. As always, I am Emily Weiler with the Montana Public Health Training Center, and I'm here with Alexis Tobin. And we will be managing the chat box and any Zoom issues, etc., for our presenter. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in there. We'll be watching. And if you have any technical difficulties. And we're excited to have you here today. This is a really important training. I think we can all agree that this is something we very likely need right now in the middle of this very unique situation with the pandemic going on. So I'm just as excited as you guys to listen to this. And with that, I'm gonna stop sharing here and I will turn it over to our wonderful presenter for today, which is James Karinji.
Morning, everybody. I'm gonna start sharing my screen here. As I told our host, I'm trying really hard to turn off any programs and message systems such that I don't get chats from my family that interrupt us or embarrass me. So, all right.
Just one quick note, I'm gonna jump in really quick. If you all want to just make sure that if you want to see Jim versus the gallery of folks who are attending here today, you can click in the top right corner of your Zoom screen. It says speaker view, and that will pin Jim. And then you can always change that back when we're in discussion. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Are you saying people don't want to stare at our faces through this entire thing?
Or black boxes, because a lot of people have their monitors off, their video off.
You can also turn me off after the second hour if you get sick of seeing me, if you'd like. So we'll.
Yeah. And Jim, right now we're seeing your presenter view.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, so we're seeing everything. So if you go back to PowerPoint, I think if you go up, you might know where it is. There should be a little box.
I wonder if I just stop.
Let's see, there's usually a little like square sometimes you can hit that's presenter mode, and you want to get out of that, I believe. I'm trying to play with it on my end.
I wonder if I can also. What happens if I swap displays?
Yeah, it could just be that it's on if you have dual monitors. Okay. Yeah.
Let me try this. How's that?
Good. Yay.
All right. So I got dual monitors, and apparently it was looking at the, so we learn something about Zoom every day these days, right? So, okay. So are we ready to go? Awesome. So I just want to say thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate your time this morning. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. It's you know, I start from the trauma end of things. Tell you a little bit about myself in a minute, but you know, I started out mainly as a LCSW. I still am in the practice world, and the way that I learned about the need to take care of ourselves in the work. I'll tell you a little story about that in a while, but it's from experiencing most of the things that we're going to talk about today, like burnout and toxic stress and all of those things that are really difficult for us right now. So what we're going to be talking about today is, you know, how do we deal with trauma, secondary trauma, primary trauma, and promote resilience in the time of COVID-19. Briefly, I'm a professor at the University of Montana School of Social Work, also faculty in public health, and I'm the chair of the school there. I always like to talk about, you know, where I got my material. So more and more, this is from my own research. However, sorry for the acronyms. I meant to change that, forgot to. We use way too many in public health, don't we? So the Substance Use Mental Health Services Administration, Department of Health and Human Services, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, the National Native and Children's Trauma Center, which I spent many years working at. And I can also give you specific references. And I was telling Emily that I'd like to, you know, just go through the PowerPoint one more time, and then we're going to share the PDF with all of you. And I'll put more of make sure the references are up to date so that you can look for them yourselves. I also like to thank specifically Molly Malloy, who is a graduate of the University of Montana School of Social Work, also runs the AHEC program here in Montana in our um, uh, interdisciplinary education program. Dan Carlson, some of Molly's materials were really helpful to me, and they'll show up in the presentation here. Dan Carlson and Karen Wood really provided guidance, were experts that I talked to from the state. And also I'd like to thank the School of Public and Community Health Sciences and Emily and Alexis and Tony that are with us. So we had, you know, conversations about this, that late summer or something like that, right? We started talking about this then. So, all right, let's just dive right in. And I'd like to just give this slide that really talks, and we'll get back to this in a minute. What we're getting at here is our brains on the pandemic. So we're talking about resilience in the time of a pandemic, a time that, and I'll try not to say this for the rest of the presentation, a time that is unprecedented. So I say that, I don't say that anymore. And the reason for that is because what are we in our 8th month of this? And I'm sorry to say that there is precedence now, and we're living this. This is our lives. So when we get into self-care in the time of a COVID-19 pandemic, which some of you on the call will know more than me, but this is not a DNA-based virus. This is an RNA-based virus, which I've learned from my epidemiological and immunological colleagues in public health, means that this is a virus that is gonna mutate more than a DNA-based virus. It's tricky. And I'm just gonna say the federal response has been horrid. My views will come out on that, and I don't apologize, but so this is a terribly difficult time for us. And what this pie chart shows us is the red larger section are the pre-existing problems, the worry, the fear, uncertainty, confusion, disappointment, sorrow, frustration, loneliness, boredom, insomnia, fatigue, grief, conflicts, triggers, shame, etc., that are with us presently in the pandemic. And I think we experience all of those things. And we'll talk about them in a bit too. And then we have the green section, which is our available energy for motivation and focus, which is juxtaposition to the fact that, I'll tell you how my world goes as an academic chair and professor in the School of Social Work, is that I have a crazy amount of standing Zoom meetings every day and every week. And then I have new Zoom meetings that come up that I don't expect, like, hey, can you do a training for us in the Public Health Training Academy on resilience? Didn't plan on that. So I fit that meeting in. And then all day long, there are these problems that come up in the pandemic that we don't realize, like students that get sick, or students that need more time, or faculty that get sick. And then we have to work these multiple problems. And the green section is, you know, that's the available energy to deal with that type of thing, which isn't enough, right? It's just not. And then finally, the orange, let's say throwback, grizz copper almost, section is our resources for coping. It's too small. I'm here to tell you that. So that's the first thing I want to recognize, is that our brains are impacted. Our neurobiology is impacted by the stress of the pandemic at a time when we need to perform at a higher level than probably we ever have in our careers in certain ways. So I'm here to recognize that. Okay, if I depressed you a little bit by that, you already knew it anyways, but then we're going to talk about what to do about this during the pandemic. But I want to recognize this issue of bandwidth, that we have very short bandwidth right now for ourselves. And then the risks of the work in public health. And I realize that there's a broad range of people on the call. And in a minute, I'll ask you to put some information in the chat. that will help us know who you are. And Alexis and Emily will help review that. And then when we take a break, I can go back too and learn a bit who you are. So we have multiple exposures and increased risks to our health during this doing this type of work. We have personal vulnerabilities. So this kind of Venn diagram of sorts. What are the pre-existing conditions that we have? And I don't just mean physical health. We know from those of you that have heard about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs are about all of us. 1 in 4 people on the call have a significant ACE score at least. All of us. I'm one. I'll share that. So we know that we are the people that are impacted. So what are our personal vulnerabilities? Work-related traumatic grief and loss can be an issue, especially in the time of COVID-19 when people are literally dying at a higher rate of this virus. People say it's the flu. No, it's not. It's not the flu. Okay, direct exposure. You know, what does this mean right now? Many of you are probably at risk of contracting the virus, even though most of us, like myself, are working in our basement rock cave offices. We're still at risk for exposure. Indirect trauma. This is one of the areas that I've researched most of my career. Secondary traumatic stress, compassion fatigue. If we have any nurses on the call, compassion fatigue is a concept that your profession initially came up with a few decades ago. Thank you for that. That's important. Empathic strain. So we want to have empathy, and we do, and it's hard to have empathy all the time. It's a drain on us. I'll also give you some examples, though, of a concept called vicarious trauma that really tells us that sometimes it's not having too much empathy, but not allowing ourselves to feel empathic. That can be a risk to us. Systems failures. One of my favorites. I will tell you that I'm teaching an advanced research class right now for MSW students, Master of Social Work students. I teach research, speaking early morning at 8 o'clock on Friday mornings. What could be better? 3 hours of research on Friday morning, right? They probably think I'm the devil. Anyways, what I teach is that we have many, many design issues in our organizations. I am presently kitty corner away from Lowell School here in Missoula Elementary School. I oftentimes ask my students, how do you think public schools are performing? And they always say, not good. They need to do better. There's all these issues that they have. And I say you're wrong, because our schools, I believe, are doing the best they can based upon how they've been designed. So I want you to think about that today in terms of your organization. What are the designs? And the question I would ask you is, if you didn't inherit your current system of working the way you did, would you do it the way you do? And the answer I'm here to tell you is not only no, it's hell no. So we would do things very differently if we could systematically. Working conditions are certainly a stress for us, and socio-cultural, contextual nature of what we're dealing with. And I'll talk about that in a slide in a minute, that it's not just the pandemic that's stressful right now. We have some other things going on that are important. So, but the pandemic, you know, how are you impacted? I guess that's something that that you could talk about right now in the chat, if you would. This is me. I just said, you know, working new problems, too much Zoom, you know, not having the capacity to fit in 200 emails a day because we're not talking to each other. So I'm interested in hearing from you. See if I can get the chat going here for me. How are you impacted by the pandemic right now? So that would be great if you could add those things to the chat. Don't be shy. So what do I mean by resilience? Let's just dive right into it real quick, because I've been doing trainings like this for a few decades now, and I'm always very concerned that we talk about Jim's areas of interest, which are trauma, PTSD, adverse childhood experiences, secondary trauma. And then I get you so depressed about the work, and we don't have time to talk about the good stuff, resilience. What do you do about it? So oh, and I see some chats coming in. Thank you. What do we do about it? How do we deal with this? Because we don't have a choice. We have to. So some examples of why I strive to be resilient. There's one, okay? That's Josephine, my youngest daughter. And she's holding, about 12-week-old Stevie, the short, smooth-haired, flop-eared, tri-colored border collie female from Plains. Got her from a ranch in Plains. Unfortunately, our Australian Shepherd died, and I was convinced as the father of the family that we were not going to get another dog for quite a while. And well, guess what? Dad lost. So anyways, off the Plains I went. And that's Josephine. I need to be resilient for Josephine. This is my daughter, Darla. She's a bobcat. Don't hold that against her, all you grizz out there. No offense, well, to you bobcats that might be on the call as well. So anyways, Darla and I went up to Plains and brought Stevie home. This is my wife, Brenda. Some of you might know Brenda, also holding Stevie in the same day, within minutes probably. Brenda, one of her roles is as the administrator of Jefferson Preschool, and then also one of the coordinators of special education services in Missoula County Public Schools. So you can think about all the conversations we have, special education teacher, trauma guy at the dinner table. Our kids think we're just a hoot, right? So anyways, after I brought Stevie home, boy, we felt great. We still do, even though Stevie's a year old now and a handful upstairs. Oh, she's quiet at the moment. So, and I'll here to tell you, all you dads on the Zoom call, for a period of about 2 weeks after bringing a puppy home, I was the best dad in the world. So maybe you were second, but that's the way. But I've fallen now. The newness is worn off. So, all right. So, what are we going to do today? And what are the training guidelines and norms? A few things I'd like you to go consider. So be comfortable. If you're not, I'm stressing you out by this, I'm working against myself because we're talking about resilience. So do what you need to do to be comfortable. If you need to turn the chat off, video off for a while, so you can, not feel like you're in a fishbowl, fine. Do whatever you need to do to be comfortable. Turn it back on when you can. Be open to possibilities. So I'd like folks to kind of put aside this idea that can get into us, those of us especially that work for government agencies, that nothing will ever change. I would like you to be open to the possibilities. Contribute to the dialogue as you can, the chat. Also, interrupt with questions at any point. If we get behind, I might ask that you hold questions until we take a break or something like that. But for now, let's just say, put them out there in the chat. Raise your hand virtually, whatever you need to do to get attention from Emily, Alexis, or myself to get your question out there. So try to focus on the positive today. And maintain confidentiality. So, this is something to, consider. This is recorded, so that's also something to consider too. So what we say will live in perpetuity on a link. And take breaks whenever you need to. My goal is for us to take like 10 to 15 minutes every hour of breaks and breakouts and things like that. But take breaks when you need to. It's also important to recognize that we're going to be talking about trauma and resilience. And as I said when I first started, it is simply the case that we know that 1 in 4 people have experienced significant trauma in their lives. So that means at least 25% of us on this webinar have experienced trauma. The dialogue could be a trigger. Well, I'm going to ask you all to think about what trauma is to you in just a bit. And people think about different things, and we might be surprised what can trigger us. So if that happens, I want you to consider a range of help, from simply taking a break in the training to seeking help after the training from a healthcare professional. Could be a primary care provider, could be a mental health center, if needed. It's essential that we take care of ourselves. Trauma, ACEs are something that impact all of us. It's not the others. Okay, let me start off. Actually, this is what I'd like you to do in the chat. Why don't we do this, and then I'll tell you a bit about myself. Why do I get to do this? Why am I the guy talking today? So who are you? You know, what brings you to the training? Where do you work? And generally, you know, what's your position? Whatever you'd like to share with us. And I'm interested in how you're doing. You know, so if you care to put that in the chat, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10 right now in terms of your overall well-being? You know, I'm a 7.5. I'll tell you that. That's about what I am right now. So getting to the low of where I want to be, I'd like to bump that up to an 8.5. Maybe I'll get some ideas from my training today of how to do that. So please put that in the chat so we know who you are, where you're coming from, and then even during the breaks, I might find ways to kind of tailor the presentation today to fit with who you are. So this is the training description. In the time of COVID-19, those working broadly in the field of public health are impacted in many ways. Those in healthcare organizations are impacted personally, professionally, and organizationally. And that's how I'd like to frame how we think about the plans that we'll come up with today, and further how you can bring these things back to your agency. So I think there's 30 or so signed up for the training. That's great. And I would like you to take what you learned today, these materials, even share them, and become part of the resilience pandemic army that we need to be to get through this, okay? Personally, professionally, organizationally. Now more than ever, it is essential that those of us in healthcare organizations work to promote resilience in those we serve, our organizations, and in ourselves. That's mainly what we're here to talk about today. How do we promote resilience in ourselves in a time when everything is working against us, okay? These are the things that you'll be able to do. They were in the description, so I won't read through all of these, but the last bullet, finally, all participants will be able to bring this information back to their organizations to positively impact all they serve and their colleagues. Most important, what can you bring back? Just a brief outline, introduction, we're doing that now. We're gonna go through a section on that I like to refer to as Trauma 101. You know, I'm in the university world right now, so Psychology 101. Remember that big class that you were in with way too many people in a lecture hall and you didn't get to ask questions, and they basically gave you, this is a wide range of what psychology is. Well, we're going to do that about trauma to a degree. We're going to talk about secondary traumatic stress. These are kind of rough timelines. I'm going to adjust. I'm a flexible presenting guy. We're going to talk about resilience and how to promote it personally, professionally, and organizationally. And then finally, we'll talk about trauma-informed systems. So how do we promote resilience in our organizations? Remember, personal, professional, organizational. How do we promote resilience in our organizations? Because I'm here to tell you that you may have heard that universities, higher education across the country are having difficulties in the time of the pandemic. Higher ed is not as valued as it once was by certain segments of the population. We're not funded the way that we really need to be. So I'm here to tell you that even though I personally and professionally need to take care of myself, there are things that my organization does that can either help or inhibit my ability to be well and to be healthy. So I think it's important that we talk about that. And then finally, some action planning. And we're going to break you up into breakout groups and such that you can have these smaller discussions, come back and report out what you've learned, what questions you have, but finally coming up with some action plans for our work. And also there will be resilience resources that we'll share later on. Okay. First things first, what is resilience? So there are many definitions out there. Resilience, like many concepts, also has some pushback to it. So one of the definitions of resilience that you'll see like in dictionaries and things like that is the ability to bounce back. Good. And if we're talking about resilience when it comes to things like trauma, sometimes the ability to bounce back, for example, from a traumatic event can almost be an offensive concept to people, because it's like, wait a minute, I had this terrible thing and I'm not strong enough to bounce back. What is that? What about that? So I want to say there's some controversy there, and I like this work here, and this is from Dr. Ann Maston. However, there's a professor researcher named Michael Unger, where I really draw much of my understanding of what resilience is. He's at the University of Halifax, Canada, and has a prolific global agenda of promoting resilience, works all over the world, and has learned from different cultures in Africa that he's been invited to participate in. What are the core elements of resilience? So Dr. Maston, who's at the University of Minnesota, says resilience is the capacity of a dynamic system to adapt successfully to disturbances that threaten system function, viability, or development. The concept can be applied to systems of many kinds at many interacting levels, both living and non-living, such as a microorganism. Unfortunately, we have a very resilient coronavirus that we're dealing right now. A child, a family, a security system, economy, a forest can be resilient. I spent a better part of a decade in Alaska, living, growing a family, working. I'll talk about that in a bit. And, we had the Beatles up there. We were one of the first to get it. And, I went up 10 years later and 15 years later, even to some parts of Alaska, and the forest is back. It's resilient. That's an excellent example. In a global climate, for example. These are all things that can be resilient. So going on, whether we are talking about a person, a biological system, a community or a social system, an economy, an economic system, a country, a political system. Gosh, I hope our political system is resilient right now, because damn it, it needs to be. Or an ecological system. Resilience is the system's ability to deal with change and come out at least as strong as it was before it was disturbed. Sometimes the system shows resilience because it is improved by the experience of having been forced to change. So I'll just briefly introduce this idea of post-traumatic growth. So there is a science out there that, instead of just looking at post-traumatic stress, looks at post-traumatic stress growth. How do those of us that have been through traumatic experiences come through it stronger and better? How do we promote that? So resilience is something to strive for. I'll tell you right now, I've been telling people, hey, I'm doing this half-day training on resilience for people around the state in public health, the Public Health Training Academy, In some ways, I feel like I'm a imposter right now because I don't feel that resilient. I could be much more resilient. So, but I'm working on it, and that's okay. So we have to push forward. And I'm here to tell you that if you don't feel very resilient at this time, that's why we're talking about this. I'm with you, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. We should talk about how do we promote it. So the word resilience can describe 3 different processes. Number 1, recovery. A system, whether it's person, community, economy, country, or natural environment, returns to the same level of functioning it had before it encountered the problem. So if we're resilient when finally this pandemic is over, it will be eventually, I believe that. I don't think we're anywhere near getting it done yet. So good we're talking about this. But getting back to at least baseline recovery. Adaptation. A system changes to accommodate a disturbance, and by doing so, it survives or thrives. Prefer thrives if we can get to that. So how do we adapt? And then transformation. The environment around an individual, such as their community, the economy, or the country, is changed in ways that make it easier for a system under stress, like a person, to do well. So contextually, we're talking about resilience within our current lives. So what is that like for you? What is your context? So maybe put that in the chat too. You know, what is going on for you personally, professionally, organizationally, in addition to the pandemic. So here's some big ones that are going on right now for me. I am demoralized by the lack of federal response. We should all be wearing masks, everyone, when we're out in public. We know from a public health standpoint, epidemiologically, from immunologists as well, what we need to do. We're not doing it. That really wears upon me. Black Lives Matter, you know, that is something that has big time impacted my family. My daughter, Josephine, the youngest one I showed you, is really fired up. And I think that that is awesome that that's the case. And so I think that what's going on racially and otherwise in the country is something that impacts me big time. I am also very, very angry about what's going on politically in the country that impacts me. There's certain fear that goes on that impacts what is happening in my world, I would believe. I'm concerned about loved ones. I have a mom that's approaching 80, so at risk, right? And it is across the country for me. I can't visit, you know, so along those lines. I shared earlier, my oldest daughter that you saw a picture taking Stevie home, 99, I might get a text at one of the breaks and find out that she is indeed positive for COVID. So she's a college student. She's a senior at MSU. She lives with roommates. You know, we have excellent plans on what to do at UM and MSU. It's all predicated on teenage brains doing the right thing all the time. I'm here to tell you that doesn't happen. So anyways, I'm concerned about my daughter. She's young, strong, climber, ran 7 miles just a few days ago. I think she's going to be okay, but that weighs upon me. There's so much uncertainty. And this idea that my colleague, Marianne Bowman, Dr. Sontag Bowman, here at the School of Social Work talks about is this idea of chronic grief. So my 2 girls are both seniors, one at MSU, one at Hellgate High. Their senior years are not like they planned. They're not how I planned my daughter's. I don't think we're going to have a real in-person commencement for my daughter. I don't know if we'll be good enough by then. We'll see. That's loss. That's grief. We can grieve about those things. So other things. So think about that contextually, where we're coming from. Okay. Let's continue on. I can share too, if you notice, I have a My Little Pony coffee cup here with tea in it. So my children, who again, I want to be really resilient for, thought one year it would be really funny when they were very young, because they got My Little Ponies. So they thought if Santa would give me My Little Pony gifts, they thought that would be really funny. And now, even at 21 and 17, guess who gets a My Little Pony gift every year? So I'm not a brony. I'm not. But anyways, so okay. So I mentioned that I've been involved. Actually, I guess I skipped who I am. We'll get to that in a little bit. So, but I mentioned that I worked at the National Native Children's Trauma Center, and I was the principal investigator for a 5-year, $3.2 million Children's Bureau grant to help create with partners in Indian country, indigenous trauma-informed child welfare. And in that project, we took some of my work and created a training on secondary trauma. And part of that is here in the presentation today. So I will tell you that I am from, a little bit about me, I'm from upstate New York, farm country. I say I'm from New York and they think I'm from New York City. No. I grew up in a town that graduated, I don't know, about 160 people had less than 3,000 people in the town. Apples, corn, Lake Ontario, the Finger Lakes, it's very rural. Kind of fast forwarding through a music career that my students asked me how successful I was. And I said, well, I'm your professor. I guess I wasn't that successful, but moved on to get an MSW. And now at Boston University, I have a PhD from the State University of New York at Albany in social work, social welfare, and have published books and peer-reviewed articles and things like that, and done many, many trainings on these areas that we're talking about today. But personally, I'll tell you, you can tell from the pictures I show, the most important thing to me is that my role is a husband and a father. So, and that's why I do everything I do, and why I agreed to do this training at a time when I don't have any time. It's important. And I know that all of you have things in your lives like that too. So I'm presently professor in social work and public health, and also the chair of the school, which means I'm the administrator leader that has the privilege of figuring out how we teach graduate students and undergrads in a pandemic. There's no precedence for this, by the way. We don't know how to do what we do in the COVID-19 pandemic. You all and me, we're figuring out how to do it as we go. Okay, so what this training is and what it isn't. So what we have here is what is the usual stress reduction kit. So picture, if you will, this is something that you could point out. It's a piece of paper. And it says, here are the directions in the middle. Bang head here. Place kit on a firm surface. Follow directions in circle of kit. Repeat step 2 as necessary or until unconscious. If unconscious, cease stress reduction activity. Okay, that's not what this training is. I am not here to tell you to bang your head against the wall. I'm not here to tell you that that it's okay that you have too high a caseload with too few resources. I'm not. What this training is to figure out a way to be resilient within the context of who we are and the organizations that we work with in reality. I know from the difficult jobs that you have that, you know, a bubble bath, chocolate, a delicious, you know, microbrew, we've got so many here in Montana, isn't going to be enough. It might work for a little while. Those are all nice things, but we need to do more and better than that. Okay. Just briefly, I want to start by giving you the definition of a trauma-informed system. So you'll see this, remember, personal, professional, organizational. I believe those three categories are essential. So there is a science out there. This is from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They have a really nifty PDF. Emily, if you think about it, remind me and I'll find that PDF and we can put it in our resource guide or a link. It's easy to find, but it's like this 15, 18 page guide that's free that gives you the essential elements of how to become a trauma-informed system. So think about your organizations when I read this aloud. So a program, organization, or system that is trauma-informed realizes the widespread impact of trauma and understands potential paths for recovery, recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families, staff, and others involved with the system, and responds by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices, and seeks to actively resist re-traumatization. This is the last thing that we'll talk about today. But I want to give you a preview of what that is. So as we continue on, think about your organizations. How trauma-informed are you? I would argue that there aren't many organizations out there that are trauma-informed enough. But if you are, share that with us in the chat. Tell us what you're doing, because we need to learn from you. And we'll talk about how you can become more trauma-informed. So when we talk about Trauma 101, stress and trauma as well, because we're not just talking about PTSD, big T trauma, we're talking about small t trauma, and we're also talking about stress, and there are different kinds of stress. So I would like to right now say that we're going to break this up in terms of stress into 3 different types. So positive stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress, okay? These slides were made a long time ago by colleagues, actually Rob Anda and his business partner, Laura Porter, who I should say also I'm an ACEs master trainer. I was trained by Rob Anda of the ACE study to learn about how to treat, how to help people learn about ACEs. Rob Anda is a fantastic guy, great guy. I'm happy to say that and call him a friend. So these 3 different types of stress are the way we talk about in the ACEs training. So the first one is positive stress, and you can see this poor little guy. Hopefully this is going on a lot right now. Hopefully this is probably an immunization, say, what's going on. I just got my flu shot. I'm old enough, I'm 52, where I can now get the shingles shot. I'm here to tell you, whoo, that one, I had the flu for 2 days. So that's a tough one. But even with the flu shots, you can see this little guy, he's kind of stressed out right now, but it's positive because of the vaccine, he's going to develop antibodies that hopefully will keep him from getting sick. So that's stress that's okay, you know. Essential. Immunizations, vaccines are essential. So tolerable stress. So what would an example of tolerable stress be? So my daughter, who is sick, has symptoms of COVID, was told by one of her MSU professors that no, she couldn't have an extension on one of her assignments. Boy, I'm not going to be a helicopter parent, but I'd like to give that professor a piece of my mind. So anyways, she had to take a test, got through it. It was tolerable. A better example might be the fact that my youngest daughter had to take the SATs, very stressful. She did great, but stressful, but tolerable. And then the final type of stress is toxic stress. So this is what we talk about when we talk about adverse childhood experiences. So I'm thinking many of you know what that is, but adverse childhood experiences are examples of child abuse and neglect that impact us and give us what we refer to as an ACE score, an adverse childhood experiences score. And the higher the score goes up, the more susceptible, the more likely we are to have health problems physically, mentally, emotionally in our lives, and can even result in a shortened lifespan. So we're not going to talk about ACEs a lot today. We could do that another time. But toxic stress is when our system, and we'll talk about this in a minute, more detail, gets so overwhelmed that that cortisol levels in our body, a hormone, gets so high that it actually kills neurosynaptic connections in our brain. They don't come back. We've got far more than we need, so it's okay, but it's not optimal. That then creates these problems. So I'll talk about this in more detail in a minute. So Emily, this is going to be our first breakout. So let's take 10 minutes and I'm going to try to do this. So we've been going for about 40 minutes here. And as interesting as I know I can be, I know you don't want to hear me talk the whole time. So we're not going to do that. So I want you all to get together. We're going to do randomized breakout groups. And I want you to come up with, in your group of 4 or 5, your definition of what trauma is. So what do you think trauma is? You might know because of your background. And if you don't, I want you to give me your best guess of what is trauma. Okay.
Welcome back.
Welcome back, everybody. Does it look like everyone's back, Emily, for the most part?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'd like us to do now, and we're going to take a 15-minute break very shortly after I go through a few more things. Or, you know what? We'll see how long this takes. We might take a break even sooner than that. Breaks are important, especially now, in terms of trying to be resilient. So we'll just kind of do this popcorn. You know, I'm interested. I guess we had 4 groups. I'm interested in hearing what your definition was. You can certainly put that in the chat. That'd be great if you, is someone willing to be first to speak up as to what you believe, what is your definition of trauma? I could go all law school and call on people too, I guess. Someone's speaking.
I was going to say, this is Alexis. I can go first if that works. I took notes for our group. Ours is a long one, but I'll try to get through it quick. So how we define trauma as a group, an event that throws everything in your life off. Sometimes you don't realize that you've been through it or that you feel like you can't get through it. Your mental health is impacted negatively, and it's something that's on your mind constantly. And there's a lot of guilt and stigma associated with it.
Excellent. Okay. There are, you know, you probably realize I'm going to give you a definition that I go by, and I think that that is an excellent one that you came up with. One of the things that we could do that we didn't, that's interesting, and I like to do with my students, and would be really fun to do with public health people, but it's beyond the scope of what we're doing today, is do the opposite and say, you know, what's your definition of health? What does that mean? You know, so, okay, awesome. How about someone from another group?
I can go next. This is David.
Hi, David.
So we came up we ended up more with sort of bullet points of what we think trauma characteristics of it are. So we came up with trauma is obviously negative. It produces lasting, not necessarily permanent effects. It's distressing. It alters your behavior. And that it's obviously disturbing as well.
Awesome. Thanks, David. And I see from the chat, you're at DPHHS. What's PHSD? You're doing the acronym thing too. We all do it. Yeah.
Sorry. I work in public health and safety. I work with Alexis.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Thanks for being here today. How about someone from the group we haven't heard from yet?
I can go. So we had, similar definition to what others said, but one of our group members added that it is an experience that's perceived as negative by an individual. So even if it doesn't seem like it would be traumatic to another person, it's perceived as negative by the person experiencing it. And again, it has lasting or far-reaching consequences.
Kathy, thank you. Excellent. So all three of our groups are hitting on things that are important here. And what Kathy's group is talking about in terms of perception is very important. So let's do just a few more things and then we'll take a break. This is what most people think of, I think, when they think of trauma. If it isn't a bunch of, you know, smart, dedicated public health people like yourselves, they go here. So this is my beloved and hard to find former 2004 Tundra. Great year. Unfortunately, should have asked where you're all from, but if, you know, those of you that are in Missoula know that we have this thing everywhere in Missoula, these things called unregulated intersections. So you have an intersection and there's no traffic signs or indication of what anyone is supposed to do in terms of stopping and going, and you're supposed to know that the person on the right has the right of way unless the person on the left gets there first. Anyways, and then everyone grows their shrubs up too high and you can't see. So this is what happens, you know, even when you're creeping along at 5 miles an hour to pick your daughter up. I got T-boned. I'm okay. You know, had some concussion difficulties for a while. My truck's gone. This was years ago. But this is what most people think about. You know, they think about a physical trauma, you know, getting physically hurt. And you all came up with really good definitions of what psychological trauma is. So again, you can see I'm as a member of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, I go to SAMHSA as kind of a go-to. I would encourage you to look at the resources. So their definition: trauma and violence are widespread, harmful, and costly public health concerns. SAMHSA describes individual trauma as resulting from an event, series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning, mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. So that's the one that I go to. There are others at the trauma center. We worked with partners in reservations to come up with a definition that fit for them. So you could do that in your community as well. So what we're talking about really is the fight, flee, or freeze to protect response. You know, we're in Montana. Many of you have seen bears, big ones. And I can tell you in Alaska, you know, I had them in my yard a lot. And, you know, when you see a bear, you know, especially too close, this is what happens to you. So you get a message in your brain that you see this huge bear, and then your hypothalamus tells your body to release adrenaline and cortisol, which causes, and this is happening to me just a little bit right now because I'm doing a training. This is what I would call more tolerable stress. Your breathing rate increases, your heart rate and blood pressure increase to protect your core bodily organs and your brain. And then finally, your hippocampus, which is responsible for memory in part, tells your brain how to encode that memory. And this is why, and I've done some expert consultation with courts, for example, where witnesses don't remember things, and they were had a traumatic event, and the people go, wait a minute, how could they not remember? Well, this is why. And it's a protection thing that happens in our bodies. So when this happens very quickly and the bear goes away, for example, that's okay. When it becomes problematic is when this happens for 20 minutes or more many times during the day. And that's when we actually get brain cells and neurosynaptic connections that are killed. How common is trauma? 1 out of 4 children that attend school has been exposed to a traumatic event. Screening results indicate that some communities, that upwards of 70% of children have been exposed to trauma and are experiencing symptoms, because not just because you have a potentially traumatic event doesn't mean you're having those symptoms. And it's estimated that 70% of individuals have experienced a traumatic event in their lives that could result in PTSD. So, or subclinical levels. So you don't have to have a clinical level. So we're gonna take a break right after this. So let's be clear, I'm in this too. We're all in it. We all need to get through this collectively together. And the reason why I think it's important to do this together in teams is I was in a training in my doctoral program, and one of the keynote speakers was the former director of all of the Department of Health and Human Services for the state of Arizona. So his name was Dr. Burns. I can't remember his first name. So anyways, Dr. Burns got the job, went there, big job. Arizona's a big state. And his predecessor told him that that 80%, he had good news and bad news. What do you want first, the good news or the bad news? And the bad news, he said, was that 80% of what you need to do, Dr. Burns, to be effective in your job is out of your control. Bummer. 20% of what you need to is in your control. Here's the good news, and this is true for all of us, I would believe. The 20% that each of you control is the most important part. And then if we look at our group here today, we all have the same circumstance where 80-20 rule applies. So if we group together, and I've got my 20%, David's got his 20%, Becky has her 20%, Kira has her 20%, Christina has 20%, Alexis, Emily, both have your 20%. Guess what? We're up to what, 140% there or something? So we have to team up together to get through this. All right, so what we're gonna do next is take a break, and then we're gonna shift to this concept of secondary traumatic stress. I'm gonna talk about how we what it is, how we identify it, and quickly what we do about it, okay? So let's take 15 minutes. Strongly encourage you to get up, stretch your legs, do what you need to do, and then we'll come back and get at this. And I certainly understand as well if people need to take breaks on your own and field phone calls, deal with crises. I think this is the only 4-hour block that I will have, I've had since like March, where I'm not answering my phone. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. All right. Let's take a break, Emily. Hi, everybody. We'll get started back up in just a second here. So as we are getting started, I want to say, it was good to get a chance to review the chat, and you can see I chatted back. Really want to thank you for your comments, and just say that Emily and I were talking too, that really want to just recognize, the difficulties that people are bringing up, and, echoing a lot of what, I said I was experiencing, and, just thank you for sharing that, and just say that, that I hope that we get some strategies going here where we can take care of ourselves the best we can. So before I move forward too, so we've kind of got the first section of the training completed, and we're moving on to part 2 soon. Any questions that folks have? I'll pause for a minute that either want to ask real time or in the chat. Okay, do jump in if you come up with any. So what we have here is, when I think about resilience, one of the things I really love are campfires, and didn't get to do a lot of the things that I would have liked to have done this summer for various reasons, but this is my backyard on the west side of Missoula, Montana. And yeah, just a picture of, it's not a campfire though, it's a cook fire. It's important to point that out because that's what we're allowed to have in Missoula, and far be it from me to break any rules. So anyways, you know, we're going to cook some things up. You can see, flip the things over there. So, but that, you know, think about what for you, the image of resilience would be as we move forward. So far we've talked about the concept of resilience, what we mean by the idea of resilience, what that can manifest, how we want to promote that, what our definition of trauma is, and also the SAMHSA definition of trauma, and then this idea of different types of stress, positive, tolerable, and toxic, and then finally, you know, this fight, flight, or flee, or freeze, I should say, mechanism, and how that manifests itself very briefly, neurobiologically in our bodies. So I guess that's something that I would like to just say again, is that trauma is something that lives in our body. It is Bessel van der Kolk. Some of you may have heard of his kind of primary work that a lot of us refer to, that is simply called The Body Keeps the Score. So it lives in our body, and the reasons are because of the processes that I showed you very basically, at least, in terms of how we react in terms of our cortisol and whatnot in our body. So we're going to move on now to talk about secondary traumatic stress and resilience. So my view is that trauma is at the root of much of what we experience, whether it's small t trauma or even that tolerable stress that we experience every day in our workplace, sometimes toxic, unfortunately. And then how do we deal with that secondary traumatic stress? So we're going to talk about what that is, how we identify it, and what we do about it. So, all right. So this is my former ride to work. So I lived in Alaska. My wife and I moved up there, sight unseen, back in about 1996 from Portland, Oregon, where I was working as a social worker, to a town called Homer, Alaska. So anyone ever been to Homer? If you have, let me know on the chat. So Homer is my happy place. It is idyllic, cosmic hamlet by the sea on Kachemak Bay. And I went up there to work at a mental health center, and worked at the mental health center for 3.5 years or so. And while I was working at the mental health center, had the good fortune to have part of my work to work in an Alaska Native village, accessible only by small plane, and got to know folks in the village. And then actually the Native corporation, so in Alaska, they don't have the reservation system. They have the corporation system that the federal government had developed to facilitate tribal access to federal dollars in different ways in the reservation system. So in short, every every group of Native villages, tribes got together and had a for-profit and not-for-profit section of their corporation. So I worked for the nonprofit arm of Chugachmute, as it was called, which are tribal villages in Prince William Sound and Kachemak Bay. And I was hired to be the community health development coordinator, which meant two things. I was an LCSW, I did therapy, and I also was a community organizer working with the tribal councils and the chiefs to help them formulate their own health goals and to achieve them. So these are villages of about 150 people each, only accessible by boat, small plane. That is the actual plane that I flew in. Interestingly, it crashed, went to the bottom of the bay, near the runway, which is basically a beach. It was brought back up, they fly again. That's the way these things work. Anyways, that's primary trauma. So if you're hearing me, you know, when you hear me tell about this story, that flying in that plane is primary. However, if it impacts you because you don't like to fly, that's secondary trauma. So we'll talk about this in more detail. So I was doing this job. The person that did it before me lasted, I don't know, 6 months. And I had been doing the job for about 1.5 years. And it was an evening in Homer. The northern lights were out. It was winter time. We were having, people brought homebrew and salmon and halibut that they caught, and it was quite idyllic. My young daughter was, oh gosh, only about 1.5 years old, because she was born, Darla, the bobcat, before, a couple weeks before I started the job. Actually flew with us in that plane and other planes to the villages. We were, you know, accepted. Our family was, it was wonderful. And my friend Dean, who's a social worker, was at the fire with us, and we're kind of, picture us around this fire. And Dean says to me, you know, Jim, how you doing? You've been at this job for, you know, almost 1.5 years. The last guy lasted about 6 months. It kind of chews people up. People get really burned out. The, you know, flying in planes is scary, even though on the good days I loved it. Other times it can be terrifying. How are you doing? And I said, you know, Dean, I really appreciate the question. And I'm here to tell you that, you know what, I'm doing okay. I'm doing good. I really don't think I'm negatively impacted by the work so much. But thanks for asking. And yeah, I'm okay. And my wife was kind of toward the other side of the fire. And out of the corner of my eye, I caught her looking at me. And she was looking at me like I just said the craziest thing that she's ever heard, that I was okay and I wasn't impacted by the work. And on our 15.5-mile ride home down a dirt road towards the head of Kachemak Bay, Brenda, my wife, told me in great detail how I was impacted by the work, and how it would behoove me to get a handle on that for myself, her, and our daughter. So lesson number 1 about secondary traumatic stress is triangulate your data, as we say in the research world. If you think you're okay, ask others. What do they think about how you're doing? Because it's important to get that perspective. And that was the start of me learning about secondary traumatic stress. So I believe it's important for us to, when we look at secondary trauma, to think about 3 stages of coping with secondary traumatic stress, or the acronym, here we go with more of them, of STS. So stage 1, knowledge acquisition of information and skills. So for example, this is accomplished by participating in this training. Stage 2, recognition, identification of risk and exposures. This is accomplished with peer support, supervision, and reflection. And then finally, stage 3, responding. What do we do about it? The application of skills, which is accomplished with self-care, supervision, peer support, and action. We'll talk about these things in more detail. Oops. All right, so another picture of resilience. I think it's important when we talk about difficult things that we anchor ourselves, that we bring ourselves back to what is important to us. So this is many years ago when my Hellgate senior daughter was a bit younger. I believe we were down at Silver Park, which isn't too far that way down by the river, on a Father's Day. So this is Josephine and Pop hanging out. The family was there too. So concepts and definitions. What are we talking about when we broadly talk about secondary trauma and work stress? I'm going to start out by talking about what we experience more broadly in our workplaces, I think, in public health, whether you're a direct care practitioner, whether you're working for a state agency that is kind of oversight, we experience all these things. So knowing about the concepts and definitions provides a basis for next steps in action. We must first understand what they are. So I believe that in week 7, 9, 8, whatever it is, I think it's probably technically 8, of a pandemic, many of us are experiencing this concept of burnout. So burnout is something that occurs over time. We might have been startled by the pandemic in the first week when everything shut down and you could walk down streets in downtown Missoula. There were virtually no cars. I could walk with Stevie, the border collie, down the middle of the street and there wasn't anyone around. So, and that feels kind of weird, kind of scary, but it's not burnout. I would say that, you know, what we're talking about now in terms of pandemic fatigue, people complaining about masks, not being able to go to a restaurant, that really what we're experiencing is a certain kind of burnout in the pandemic. So this happens slowly over time. And I would say that my students in week 10 of a 14-week shortened semester are starting to feel this too in the pandemic. Our values are eroded. It can impact our dignity, our spirit, our will, our soul. It spreads gradually and continuously over time and really kind of creates a downward spiral. So these are the conditions that impact burnout. So Maslach and Leiter are the grandmothers of this idea of burnout and burnout research. And I'm sure that none of you in your workplaces experience these things. Never, right? Overloaded work schedules. Too little time and too few resources to accomplish the job. I saw that in the chat. Lack of control. Reducing costs is primary over the needs of clients or employees. You know, this is something we experience with budget crises at the university. It's very difficult. The breakdown of community. Work gets faster and faster, and it's hard to be a community in our workplace, which further disrupts our job performance. Unfair treatment of workers, which can happen in times of crisis, like a pandemic. Conflicts in values, when we can't serve people that we know we need to serve because of the difficulties in our organization. So, of course, I'm joking. These types of things are rather prevalent in most of us that work in public institutions at this point, private as well. So what are the symptoms? They include exhaustion, cynical detachment from our work, and feelings of ineffectiveness. So here are some more contributing factors. Mismanagement, schedule imbalance, intense work days, and so on. So we will get to what you do about these things. So don't let it bring you down too much, but it is important, I think, for us to be able to name these things. And when we see them, to be able to identify them. And I'll tell you why in a moment. So as we move forward in terms of a chat question, I'm interested in hearing from you. How do these factors impact you in the pandemic? Do you see these things in your workplace? So if you could share those things in the chat now, we'll loop back around to look at them. So please let me know. Do you see this in others in your workplace? What factors contribute if you do? Okay, so in terms of the next concept that I would like to talk about is an idea or a concept called vicarious trauma. So if there are any therapists on the call, those of you, or mental health professionals or physical health, or I even think this happens with folks, for example, I've worked with people in different states in call centers that are the ones that take the calls about the child welfare issues, about the child abuse and neglect. They're not the ones doing the direct work, but they hear it. So this is the negative transformation in the helper that results from empathic engagement with trauma survivors and their trauma material, combined with a commitment or responsibility to help them. So I would say in the pandemic, almost everyone that we're talking to or about in our work in public health is impacted in a way that can create vicarious trauma for us. So this is a kind of more clinical definition, but it's not the only way to look at this. So think of this more broadly, if you will. This is a slide that talks about the theory behind this concept. And what's important, most important, I would say here, is to realize that the mechanism that causes vicarious trauma is actually related to not allowing ourselves to care about the others and the work that we do. So it's super important for us to allow ourselves to care, but to do so with boundaries. So that's a little conflicting what I'm telling you there. So if you have questions about that, let me know. But there's this idea, and we were even taught in my MSW program, that it was super important to have a detachment from those that we work with. And what this theory talks about is, yes, we need to have good boundaries, but think about the relationships in your lives and how many close relationships do you have in your lives with people that you don't have some kind of empathy or caring for. I would argue that the important people, you have that. So allowing ourselves to do that is important. Just talked about this. And I think the important part of this slide is that if we process this, if we deal with that, if we talk about the fact that we are caring about the people we work with, although it's difficult, it can become an opportunity. So where we're going now is this concept of secondary traumatic stress, which I feel like is one of the best ones for us to think about in the time of a pandemic, when we know others that are impacted. I told you that it looks like my daughter has COVID. So you might have a daughter and it might make you think, oh my God, what if my daughter gets COVID? Hopefully yours doesn't, but it feels distressing to you. So broadly, that's what we're talking about in terms of secondary traumatic stress. The natural and consequent behaviors and emotions resulting from knowing about a traumatizing event experienced by a significant other, the stress resulting from helping or wanting to help a traumatized person. The signs of secondary traumatic stress broadly mirror those of post-traumatic stress disorder, or subclinical, meaning it's not a medical problem, symptoms of secondary traumatic stress. They can be nightmares, flashbacks, an exaggerated startle response, difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping, changing in the way one views the work and the world. Signs of secondary trauma can also include the denial and detachment from clients, alternatively, an over-identification with clients. So I'll tell you that one of the things that impacted me in my work in the villages, and not just the villages, but in Homer, in the Community Mental Health Center, because I was trained as a trauma therapist, was sometimes I would see 6, 8, 10 trauma survivors a day in my work. And then when my daughter was about 2.5 years old, my wife had been working, not working, been at home, stay-at-home mom. We were grateful that that could happen for a time. That was our decision and her decision. However, you know, we got to a place after about 2.5 years of it where Brenda was like, you know, I could really use some adult time. You know, how about, you know, a couple of half days a week, we get some daycare for Darla, my first little girl, 2.5 years old. So we had to go out and find someone that I would trust to take care of my daughter when I was working with 8 to 10 people a day that had experienced physical, emotional, sexual traumas in their lives. And I was also sometimes working with perpetrators, because in these villages, there was no one else, so I had to do both. How do you think it worked out for me finding someone that I could trust to watch my little girl? everyone in my world was someone who was doing bad things. It changed my worldview. So it was difficult, but we wound up finding someone that worked. It was actually a friend that we knew who was doing a daycare. But over time, you know, I was able to deal with that and get better. But it was really difficult. So these things can happen to us. We actually change our view of the work. When we get really negative, when we start to feel that we can't be effective. So these are important things that can change. It changes our worldview. So what situations increase the risk of secondary trauma? Being overwhelmed, being isolated, feeling disorganized, helpless, and a personal history of trauma and or depression. So we really need to think about what it is that we've experienced on our own and how that impacts us. So some specific examples that I kind of went through already in terms of what secondary trauma is. Difficulty concentrating, impaired work performance. So that's one that I like to bring up to supervisors. And sometimes I will hear, unfortunately, that supervisors say, well, you know, public health is tough, you know, working at a medical agency, working at partnership or something like that is just difficult. And that's how it goes. So you just kind of have to deal with it. Well, I do not think that that's a good thing, a good way to look at it. And I usually bring up to those supervisors that what we really start to talk about here, one thing is impaired work performance. So another one that's really important are to be tempted to do more for a particular client and to do it alone. Or reluctance in talking about a particular case or client, or reminders of the case or client over time. This is a point that I want to hit home broadly for all of you. So secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, toxic stress are normal reactions to abnormal circumstances. And I write it down 3 times here. The reason for that is I really, really, really want to hit home that we do not want to beat ourselves up by feeling that we should not have these feelings or reactions. It is not normal, don't like to use that word so much, in a pandemic, to work in a pandemic like COVID-19. We've not done this before. We don't know how to do it. It's difficult. So I worry more about individuals that have been impacted by the work than those that have not sometimes. In regards to the definition, should we care? Does this matter? To a degree, some, because I think it's important to be able to have these conversations, to understand how and why we're being impacted. But as we move forward to what we do about these things, that is the most important part. So I think I'd like to, could we do like a short breakout, Emily? Let's do like, I don't know, 7 minutes. Let's split between 5 and 10 and say, let's do a breakout again and see what's resonating with people so far and what questions you might have. And then we'll report back out so we can make sure that things are clear. Is that okay, Emily?
Yes, that's fine. I just sent out the links to the same groups as last time.
All right.
So pop on in there.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. So what I'd like to do now is have just a conversation so far about what's resonating, what questions you might have, and we can kind of just go popcorn. So you know what's resonating for you so far, or what questions do you have?
So we talked about how this is kind of the first time a couple of us have heard the term trauma used in reference with the pandemic and found that kind of interesting. I mean, it completely fits. It's just never popped up into our vocabulary to use it with those.
Excellent. Is that Becky?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, and I totally agree. You know, so we all have our lenses. As a trauma therapist and researcher, that's kind of where I go. But yeah, I think it does fit when we look at the impact of this on us. The other thing, like I said, I have a colleague that in Dr. Sontag, who talks, her area is grief, and this idea of chronic grief also impacting us. So it's for real. Absolutely. Thank you, Becky. Others?
This is Alexis. We kind of talked about how, and you alluded to this earlier, but like how there's so many factors at play right now, and how that, you know, that impacts us differently in our different positions in public health. So for me and Dave, you know, we were kind of talking about like we're at the state level and then others are at the local level. So we experience that trauma maybe in a different way. We're seeing our colleagues at the local level in county health departments, you know, really struggling. And, you know, us being at the state level and having to, having a ton of red tape, you know, that we, and barriers and challenges to supporting those that we, you know, we know what some of the issues are and we know where we can support, but there's all those barriers. And so like experiencing trauma in a different way, or that secondary trauma, and feeling, you know, like not very resilient when it, or, you know, unable to cope when it's indefinite. Like how do we, and I think my question, and everybody else in my group can chime in, but one of my questions is like, how do we, I think, you know, resilience is really important because how do we make sure that, you know, how do we cope when this is so prolonged and it's not like a traumatic event per se. Like it's not like you talked about earlier, like a car crash or, you know, a heartbreak or like a death. Like this is something that is indefinite and we don't know when it's going to end. So how do you cope and how do you use resilience to like as a tool to, you know, allowing you to be the best you at work and also at home?
Those are excellent points. And yeah, this is right now, you know, there's also this concept of complex traumatic stress, right? And that's when we have multiple traumas that occur over time. And that's an excellent point, that the pandemic is at this point is chronic. And that's why I said, you know, for the first few months of this, I kept saying unprecedented times. And now I'm saying I'm not allowing myself to use that word because there's precedence. This is our lives right now, right? So what do we do about that? And another point that your group seems to have made, Alexis, yeah, that idea of, you know, there are people that are in bureaucratic roles that, you know, they don't see patients with COVID, but they work with people who do. And then they have fear for the people who do that. And I've been hearing about, you know, for last week, Montana was the worst in the country except for the 2 Dakotas, you know, so that's an impact. And we start thinking about public health centers being overwhelmed and people leaving jobs. And then the other thing, you know, people not believing that a mask can help, you know, that is stressful. Absolutely. Other comments, questions? Was there another group that we didn't hear from yet?
Hi. Yeah, I think our group, we just kind of talked about, I think just the general feeling of being burnt out and the overwhelming arc and resonation of that.
Okay, so that concept of burnout, Kira, was resonating. Okay. Thank you. And yeah, bummer. Not surprised. And so the good thing, again, I want to stress, and we'll move on now to our identify it. I guess abnormal or normal abnormal. So, okay. And I want to just give you a little preview. So we're going to move on to talk about how do we identify this? What do we do about it? Some different strategies. I actually am going to pandemic. Resilience. So if those settings or know people, we will talk about organizations a little bit and what a trauma-informed organization needs to entail. And then finally, we'll do a breakout for you to identify what you took away from today and some planning of what you're going to do for yourself personally, professionally, and organizationally. Okay. Let's move on. I'm moving my screen around here a little bit. Okay, so I'm a trauma therapist. I still maintain my license. I don't have a practice right now, but I'm primarily a social scientist at this point, doing research and teaching. But I have years of experience working as a therapist, and people always think that that means we need to talk about things. And I'm here to tell you that I am not a therapist that believes personally or professionally that everyone needs to talk about everything. I don't believe that. Sometimes, yes, a lot of the times, yes, but not always. So, but I think when it comes to these concepts, secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, Kira brought up burnout, it's important to talk about it. So, and the reason for that is that the effects are widespread and intense right now. All of these concepts decrease worker effectiveness, which can contribute to turnover. We're seeing that in the pandemic. People leaving their jobs, even if they have a job, because it's become too stressful. And then it impacts the agency's ability to provide services. So I think that when we talk about these stresses, and we can do that in the pandemic, you three of you gave examples right now, it externalizes the event. So when it comes to secondary traumatic stress, and I gave the example of working with an individual that might remind me of my daughters, and I feel that, ooh, my daughter might be impacted. That's scary, but my daughter isn't. It helps me realize that it feels internal to me, but it's not. So if there's a way that you can do that, I think that that's important, naming it, talking about it. And there are different types of traumas. So we can think about these when it comes to the pandemic. A lot of these apply, acute versus chronic. I think this pandemic is both right now. There are acute elements of it, certain areas of our state right now, healthcare systems being overwhelmed. There's violent and nonviolent trauma. There's man-made and natural. Violence versus life circumstances. So this is a life circumstance for us in the pandemic. Physical versus emotional. Individual, intimate versus community. So, and the pandemic spans a lot of these things. So talking about it in this instance is important. All of these phenomenon in the pandemic potentially impact all of us now more than ever. Moving forward in the presentation, we'll use these terms, burnout, vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, toxic stress, as examples of what we all might be and are likely experiencing to some degree. So I would say too that, one of the symptoms of trauma, secondary trauma, is numbing out. So just because someone looks like they're okay, don't assume they are. So I would think that, you know, in my instance of hanging by the fire in the Northern Lights and my wife saying, no, 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 you say you're okay, but you're not. Some of that was numbing out. Some of it was denial. It allowed me to keep going. That's a good thing. And it's not sustainable. So I would ask that you consider that. Am I numbing out? And we can do that by, you know, we do that just by ourselves. And we also can do that with substances, you know, so that's an element that I would like you to consider. So what to do about these phenomena? Toxic stress, burnout, vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue. Oh, I didn't talk about compassion fatigue. Vicarious trauma, sometimes I do. All overlap. So that's the important thing. And now we're going to start to concentrate on what to do about it. We're not going to take a break quite yet. I put them in when I thought we would be, but we already took one. So I'm going to suggest, well, actually, yeah, we're going to do another group activity. So that's good. I want to keep this moving. Like I said, I appreciate your attention, and also I really do want to hear from you. So in this activity, I would like you to think about what work-related stressors you're experiencing. How is your job impacted? Does it impact your ability to collaborate? How does this impact your ability to take care of yourselves? What are the elements of this? Is it impacting turnover in your agency? So think personally, professionally, and organizationally. What are you noticing in your specific organization? So for me, I would say at the University of Montana, morale is low in some ways because of what's being experienced. That we don't have students on campus as much as we used to. That's a bummer for them. It's a bummer for us. We have budgetary issues that are stressful as well. And I see that impacting my colleagues in their personal health. So that's something that I would share. So let's do another 10-minute breakout and kind of address these questions. And I would like to tell you that these are the questions that I put up to guide your conversation, but I'm very open to you using this time to discuss what it is that you need to discuss relative to the material. So think about that, and then maybe pick a person to report out that hasn't reported out yet, such that we share those report out jobs. And I also want to say I'm not going to get Socratic like law school and call on people, because I don't want this to become a stressful experience. You got enough stress. So, all right.
Sounds good.
Let's do another 10 minutes.
Perfect. You guys, everyone's back. Sorry, Alexis, I got your message too late.
Dang it.
You sent it and then it was like boop, boop, and everyone returned.
Ah, darn it.
We're going to go back into groups though, so we could pick up, you know, where we were. But
Okay, yeah, we were like still on the last few questions, which I
Well,
think were really important and exciting.
what are the important and exciting one? Let's start there. Someone from Alexis's group?
Yeah, jump in, Tracy or Sue.
Yeah, well, I think we talked about the workload is so COVID priority and COVID related that we're not able to do all our other jobs, and how that's uncomfortable because we're doing like the very minimal that you have to do to get your reports in. And it doesn't feel good because you didn't do a good job at that. Or just having to say, sorry, couldn't do it, you know. That's really uncomfortable.
Absolutely. You know, I certainly feel that way in my work, you know, trying to figure out the baseline. And I see Tony. Hi, Tony. So folks are, you know, we understand at the university, you know, what it's like to have that happen too. And it's even harder, I think, and more, you know, so important in healthcare. So anything else from your group, or questions or comments?
I think Tracy mentioned this, but just in terms of like, and this might kind of be, you know, speaking to that number 3, but like, if you're in a leadership position or a position where you work heavily with like a team, how like, you know, other people's stress can definitely impact your own, and where, you know, people might need to lean on you, but you're already stressed out, or you're, you know, you're already, like Sue said, like not getting some things done. Like that just adds to it. When, you know, and maybe quote unquote like normal times, like everyone might be experiencing that at different times. So you're more likely to be able to lean on people, and be able to like make that space for someone, where like now it just feels like it's adding almost to your own stress.
Yes.
And I think it got brought up in our group as well that self-care becomes difficult because of your routine at home that can be disrupted, either whether you're working at home or other people are doing things at home they would normally be doing, or you can't go for a walk or to the gym or whatever, you know, just basically you have a normal self-care routine that's most likely been thrown off by everything that's going on.
Excellent points, David. Yeah. We had a time period where our family was together when the pandemic started. My oldest narrowly made it out of Costa Rica, and we were together as a family in this way for the first time in years, you know, because everyone's got things to do and now there's nothing to do, and we eat together all the time. And, you know, it was super magical for a while. And then it was not, you know, because it wasn't our routines. And we, like you said, we couldn't go to the gym. Daughter couldn't do her dance and, you know, be with friends. And so, yeah. We got one more group.
Oh, I think that was our group. Sorry. So one of our things that we discussed was not being able to interact in person with our coworkers. I know I'm fortunate I am in the office, but doing everything by Zoom and the burnout with Zoom and not being able to read people's body language and working remotely, and one of my teammates there is in a condo, and you know, sorry, sometimes my earbuds just randomly mute me. And you know, trying to find that personal space, and you know, just kind of things like that.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. You know, I say excellent. Thank you for reporting it. We're now reporting good things. So, but let's move on to discuss what we do about these things. So, in this module, you know, we talk about how we identify these things, and then we'll quickly move on to the what you do about it. We'll take a break in just about 15 minutes here at the most for another 15. So be attentive to these symptoms. So in our emotional lives, physical health, you know, how are you impacted? So, you know, I'm a tummy guy. So I know when I start feeling it in my gut, you know, I'm getting stressed. It's starting to impact me. Some people's shoulders, headaches, you know, all kinds of things. So be attentive to that. How are your relationships? It's a stressful time for all of our relationships, right? And we're all in the same boat. So it's difficult because you can't really find anyone right now that's not impacted by the pandemic. When it's other kinds of trauma, there's others that were not impacted by that, but we all are. So, okay. And our workplace behaviors, what are our attitudes like? Stressing here that there is no template for how to deal with these times in public health. It's unprecedented. I said I wouldn't use the word, but I am. It's unprecedented. So we apply existing concepts and possible solutions to adapt them. No chat right now. Emotional indicators. So this is how, you know, we know we're impacted? Are we angry? Are we sad? Emily and I were just talking about, there's some things going on we're angry about, right? It's like, I'm not usually angry like that. What's happening? We might feel more anxious. Certainly, I know that's the case for my girls. Physical indicators, here are some. Are we more sleepy? Are we more tired? You know, it's like one of those pharmaceutical companies, you know, could cause insomnia, could cause too much sleep, you know, but it really is individual to all of us. And then what are the personal indicators? Are we blaming more? Do we have mood swings? Are we getting cynical? You know, that's a big one for me and my wife, you know, because we're very passionate about our work. And when we start finding ourselves complaining about, you know, everything, I'm thinking about my friend Tony Ward. You know, Tony, you and I go for walks, right? Or we have meetings to support each other. And, you know, we can always tell, you know, I think that, you know, we get to a place where we just have to kind of bitch for a while, you know, and it's like that, it's cathartic to an extent. So I will say we also have to then stop and say, spill our pain and move forward to what we do about it. So, but I pay attention to those things in myself and my friends. Workplace indicators, are we missing appointments? Are we late? Is our productivity difficult? But so the thing about this is that, you know, I'm hearing from all of you saying, but I have so much more to do. So even if we feel like we aren't as productive as we were, we've got way more on our desks. So we might come back around to this, but I'm not going to do a group activity right now because I want to move forward with some of the elements and make sure we have time for what you do about it. But here are some things that you could do. And remember, I said that I really hope you look at this as a resource. So here's an activity that you could potentially do in your workplace with your colleagues. And I encourage you to take this and use it. Use pieces of it. Use a slide. Develop your own. How has my work impacted how I see the world? How has my work impacted my relationships? How has my work impacted how I see myself or others see me? And how has my work disrupted or altered my sense of balance? We are all unbalanced right now. And if you are balanced, you know, please let us know in the chat that you know exactly what to do and then tell us, because we need your help. So, but I think we're all impacted somehow. Let's go a little bit further and then we'll take our second 15-minute break. So, all right, organizational stress is where I want to go with this. So what are the characteristics of organizations that are stressed? So they can be stuck, they can be missionless, they can be crisis driven, they can be punitive, they can be unsafe. None of the things that we want in our organizations. But how do we assess the levels of stress, or in this case, secondary trauma? So there are instruments out there, there are screeners that are put out for the use of those of us that are out there. You don't have to be a social scientist to be able to use these. The ones that I would refer you to, and they're free online, are the secondary traumatic stress scale and the professional quality of life scale. There's instructions on how to score these, but honestly, when I use them in trainings, I don't really care about that. I say go through the questions and just discuss them. The first one, I am happy. Never, rarely, sometimes, often, very often. I am preoccupied with more than one person. I get satisfaction from being able to help people. I feel connected to others. So these are things you can just discuss with your coworkers and be like, no, I don't feel so connected anymore. It doesn't really matter where you are on the Likert scale. We're not doing a study here, but these are things to consider. I was also involved a few years ago with the National Child Traumatic Stress Network in developing the Secondary Traumatic Stress Informed Organization Assessment, or the STSI-OA. This is a free assessment that you can use at your organization and actually fill it out online. And my colleague, Dr. Ginny Sprang, who is at the University of Kentucky Medical Center, and her team will actually analyze the data for you and give it back to you. So that's pretty slick. So if you're interested in that, we'll share this as a PDF for all of you after the training. So again, take two. The stress that we are feeling in the pandemic is a normal reaction to abnormal circumstances. It is not normal for Dr. Ward and I to be chairs in a pandemic. I think we both agree that we didn't anticipate that. We don't know what to do. We aren't making it up. We're using data, but we're figuring it out as we go along. So please give yourself the grace that you need. Okay, let's take another 15-minute break. And then we are moving on to the rest of the time talking about mitigation strategies. What do we do? So we've got a little less, we'll have an hour and 15 or so to talk about them. And hopefully you walk away with some strategies. Okay, see you in a little bit. Welcome back, everybody. So we've got a little over an hour left of our time together today, and we're going to spend all of that time talking about the what you do about it portion of all of this, or some ideas. And I also want to say that we are in science, if we don't have something directly related to what we're experiencing. So in this sense, we have not been in a 21st century pandemic when there's political, racial unrest, economic difficulties before. So what we do is we go to what we do know from the science. So a lot of this is taking related science to say these are some things that have been found to be helpful. So I'm going to go through some of these slides, not all of them, but I put them in here such that it would be a resource for all of you. Some of the group activities that you can do on your own. I do want to make sure that we have time for some planning and next steps. This cartoon here is just a visual representation of the fact that we need to, using an airline analogy, put your oxygen mask on first. As public health workers, you're all dedicated to helping others, but it's essential that we get that oxygen mask on first. Why? So we don't pass out. I remember the first time flying out of Anchorage, Alaska, red eye, holding my daughter, baby, wife drooling on my shoulder. It's 2 in the morning. We're about ready to take off. And I heard that, put your oxygen mask on first. Sounds ridiculous because we want to care for others, but we have to do it so that we are able to do the help that we want to. So I've said at the beginning, we need to help ourselves out in 3 different ways: personally, professionally, and organizationally. And also we need to promote awareness, balance, and connection in the work that we do. So I'll back up just for a minute. So there's an exercise that I'm going to point out that you could do at the end, or I should say when you leave and go back to your organizations. And it's super important to remember that we need to address all of these areas. So what are we going to do personally to help our own health? Professionally, are we going to go to trainings like this? And organizationally, are we going to hold our organization accountable for becoming trauma informed such that they can help us do the work that we need to do? So awareness of our surroundings, how we're being impacted, finding balance within the work that we do, very difficult to do now in the pandemic. One of our colleagues on the call mentioned you can't go for a walk sometimes. You can't be at home, work at your workplace. You're at home all the time. You can't go to the gym because even though they're open, you feel like it's not safe, and it probably isn't. What are your connections to, in Montana, we have the outdoors that are beautiful, amazing. And I didn't know it was going to be a nice day today. It is in Missoula as I look out my basement egress window. So that's a good thing. We have opportunities for this. Do you have some form of faith or spirituality in your life? As a therapist, whenever I hear people going through difficult things and they tell me they have that spirituality, even though that's something sometimes I struggle with in my life, I feel good about that because that is something that can be really helpful. So you can tell we're on different, we did the break earlier. This is an activity that you could do in your organization. So how will you address awareness, balance, and connection in your lives? So we've done some other breakouts. In the interest of time, we won't do this right now, but this is one way to help yourself. So remember, the ABCs in doing a plan personally, professionally, and organizationally to help yourself out. I'm fortunate to do some writing, a couple of chapters, 2 different editions of a book on complex post-traumatic stress disorder treatment with Dr. Lori Perlman, who is the woman who really coined the phrase vicarious trauma. And we came up with this idea of radical self-care. So, excuse me, that the problems that we're having in the world, and this is even before COVID-19, that they require something more than just the average way of trying to help ourselves. So we came up with this idea of radical self-care. And I was actually emailing with Lori yesterday thinking, well, geez, if we had to be radical before a pandemic, what do we need to do now? So I would argue probably even more planful in how we help each other out, ourselves too. So we're talking about 4 different areas here. And again, these are areas that I would encourage you to look at personally and then in your organization. So social support, professional consultation, spiritual renewal, and working protectively. So social support, how do we do this? To create personal and professional communities. Now that's more on Zoom. That's walking around with masks on. That's socially distancing outside, but super important. We need to spend time together. We need to know one another's personalities and concerns, care for one another, share values, define these communities and what they mean, and trying to find ways to spend time together during a pandemic, which is very hard to do. I know that the faculty in public health are doing things like getting together on Zoom and not talking about work and spending time chatting about what they're binge watching on Netflix. You know, sounds, you know, superfluous or wow, does that really matter? But what I'm hearing is it does. And in our admin team for the college, we heard about that. We were like, hey, wait a minute, what are they? Tell us, we want to do that. So now we have this list of what they are. So doing things like that is super important in terms of our social support. Because I can tell you, you know, just for me, I'm a big music guy. This is the longest I've went without seeing live music since I was like 16. So, you know, it's lonely. How do we address that? Consultation is super important. So figuring out how we get the support that we need in an organization that is taxed, that is overworked. So this is a slide that this was developed basically for mental health clinicians, one element of public health, but it can be applied to many different areas in public health as well. Spiritual renewal. I mentioned spirituality earlier. That can mean many things for many people. It doesn't have to be organized. It could be traditional or tribal, indigenous. It could be of other types of religious traditions. It could be just a sense of belonging to a community or family. And then, you know, just trying to get back to the place of being able to notice the beauty in the world that is hard to see sometimes when you're dealing with the virus that we're dealing with. This one is super important as well, working protectively. So I mentioned earlier when we were talking about vicarious trauma, that it's important for us to be able to engage with each other, to engage with our clients, whether that is a patient, if you're a doctor, or a supervisor, connecting with your supervisees, if they're in a rural health clinic and you're in Helena. Being able to maintain that connection is important, but we have to do it working protectively. So maintaining awareness of both the present moment and the larger context. it's hard in the pandemic to think of anything, but I just saw from the Missoulian in our break that we have 704 more cases today. It's hard to think that we will get through this, but we will. Public health science tells us that. If we ever get a federal government that believes in science again, I bet you we can turn this around a lot faster. So accepting our limitations. I know that I have unreasonable expectations in my job without a pandemic. Now they've become crazily unreasonable. So what is it that we do when we get 200 emails a day and then I don't get back to people in a timely manner? What I've figured out, the only thing I can do is apologize and ask for people to give me the grace that I need, because I can't keep up with that. So, and focus on the processes. How are we, we're doing good work. You know, I look at the University of Montana and how folks are working so hard to keep students safe and ourselves. You know, we're gonna have cases, you know, so we need to have reasonable expectations. And we also need to realize that we are doing our damnedest to move forward and create an environment where students can safely learn. Managing boundaries. I don't mean to say boundaries aren't important. When I say we need to have empathy, they are. We need to have both empathy and boundaries when we're working with clients or patients. We need to process our responses and try to do something very different between meetings or meetings with clients. The example of, you know, public health faculty talking about Netflix and things like that. That's a good one. What can we do differently? Attend to our own bodily responses and experiences, knowing that if we're in a meeting and if I'm a tummy guy, I start to get that feeling that I know means I'm stressed out, then I might need to walk out. I might need to take a break. I might need to turn off my Zoom camera for a bit, or something like that. One of the things that's super important, and Emily, before I forget, I know that Karen, who was one of our consultants, said there's a resource that she sent me relative to what EAP resource that exists for those of you that are state employees. So I want to make sure that we get that out, because I don't think I put it in the slides, but I do have it. So there are resources for folks. And one of the things, and they have a program on resilience at the state, for those of you who work there, that complements what I'm talking about here today. And they do talk about, and they stress the intervening in the thought, behavior, emotion cycle. So this is basic cognitive behavioral psychological science here. So we have a thought that results in an emotion that results in a behavior. My thought is, the pandemic is too much. My God, 704 cases again. There's no point in trying. I give up. My emotion, I feel worthless. I feel discouraged. And then my behavior is to maybe be rude, to avoid thinking about the fact that this pandemic is happening, avoid thinking about the fact that I have a class to teach on Friday morning, and figuring out a way to develop optimism instead of that happening, because that's not true. I can do something. I can't do everything, but that cognitive behavioral triangle is a place that we can intervene for ourselves and for others through peer support. So this is another opportunity that where you could do a group activity with people in your agencies to determine the commitments you can make to take care of yourselves physically, emotionally, intellectually, socially, spiritually, financially. What are ways that you can do that? So when we come back around to the group activity in just a bit, these are things that you could consider in your self-care planning. It's important also to understand what we can't change on the organizational level. So at the university, we're underfunded, in my opinion. The data shows that. We don't really have what we need from the state or the Montana University system to be what we want or feel we need to be for our students. And we do the best we can. That's not going to change. I need to work the problem within the constraints that we have in our organization. Paperwork, that's a big one for all of us all the time, right? That's going to be there. Whether you're working in public health or on a grant, there's grant reporting, there's, utilization reviews that need to be happening. I got to speak with Dan Carlson, who was one of the consultants I talked to, who does that type of work for the state. And then to build in supports on the organizational level. So collegial support, give you an example of how public health is doing that. Consistent supervision, respect for each other, wellness activities, gosh, even at the university, we'd have opportunities to do things more often together, but, going and getting a flu shot for wellness was an opportunity in the Skaggs building to rub shoulders with people and masks on, socially distance, to be able to have that type of connection, making sure we get that organizationally. Full use of vacation leave, super hard right now, but super important. My wife and I are having arguments about who needs to take time off, and then we say, but I don't have time, I can't. And then she says, but you need to. And I say the same thing to her. We have to figure out ways to make this happen. Supervision is also something that I hope you consider in your work, in figuring out what we do about all this, whether you are a supervisor or you are supervised. I know I do both. I'm a supervisor for assistant professors and our staff and clinical faculty, and I have more people supervising me than I could ever imagine. The university, we have a lot of bosses, don't we? So yeah, so, but that type of supervision is important. Regularly scheduled, not crisis driven, protected from other tasks. I can say that I meet with my dean once a month, and then Tony Ward, who's on the call, and I meet with Dean Marvinova together as a dyad too, and that almost never gets interrupted. So that's super important. High quality supervision in public health is really important, whether you're doing casework. It also helps us define next steps and limits, can help us increase our productivity, do stronger assessments, stronger engagement, and also have improvements in client goal attainment. So whoever our clients are within your public health realm. There are 3 different forms of basic supervision that I would encourage you to look at: administrative, educational, and supportive. So they're all important, and the definitions are here or there, but they're kind of somewhat self-explanatory for the names of them. Figuring out how you do what you do administratively, educationally, learning from your supervisor or helping your supervisees learn, and just general support, acknowledging what's hard right now, which is a lot. My research has shown that peer supervision is an important thing. So we can support each other. I'm a full professor, tenured chair at the school. Tony Ward is a full professor, tenured professor, chair at the school. We get what each other is going through, and on good days we can support each other. But this has to be done in a way that 2 things. It's best if it's institutionalized, and then it also has to, I can't always just go to Tony's office and say, oh my God, listen to what I have to share with you, without understanding that my friend has the capacity to listen, because he likely has gone through something too these days. So it's important to have numbers of people that can do that. I'm sure I could go to Curtis's office. I could go talk to Emily, who understands what's going on at the university, working here so long. So we form a network of how we're able to do this. So I guess let's do a breakout right now for 10 minutes and look at this chart. So I would like you to think about what you can do for yourself personally, professionally, and organizationally. And, we won't have time to really do this in detail, but just start the process and think about what it is that you could be putting in these squares. So you could print this out in your home organization. You can do it virtually because you're not together so much these days. But what I tell people to do is make sure you have a few things in each box, and then I want you to circle the one that you're going to do this week. So think about that. And if you could maybe just come away with 1 or 2 ideas of some things that you can do based upon our training so far, I think that'll be a success. So let's take, sorry, it's only gonna be 10 minutes and we won't have much of a report out due to time, but let's at least practice this. This is the cognitive behavioral triangle, plan, do, study, act type of thing in action. I want you to see you can do it and go back to your organizations and try it out. So.
All right, you should see your little invite for a room again.
Welcome back, everybody. What are some things that that you heard, either that you thought of from yourself, or that you heard others talk about in your groups that would be that you could do in any of these areas? What's something that you could do?
I can go for our group, Jim.
Thanks, Tony.
So we talked a little bit at the personal level, you know, just getting out through the day, maybe multiple times to take walks and just, you know, just get some fresh air, get in nature a little bit, and, you know, just get out of our work environment and just go take some walks. At professional level, you know, just taking advantage of things like these types of trainings. You know, you may have saw the emails about the meditation thing that's at noon today. So our health and wellness folks on campus are sending out lots of opportunities for students and staff and faculty to log in and do these different types of meditation and wellness events. So, you know, professionally, I've been trying to take advantage of those, just like I told David, putting tools in the toolkit. And then the organization one, you mentioned the Netflix one. So the one we have tomorrow is actually a YouTube one. So everybody was supposed to send their favorite short YouTube video to one of our staff persons. And basically we're going to watch YouTube videos for an hour, and hopefully they're super funny. And, you know, just a way of bringing everybody together, even if it's by Zoom, and just, you know, taking your mind off of all the crap that's going on right now.
Thanks,
That's a
Tony.
cool one, Tony. I really like that. We talked about like a group fun day, but we kind of defined it in different ways. And I think that's a really creative example. So thanks.
Another suggestion we had was a talent show as our next time around. So Emily takes a lot of credit, or deserves a lot of credit for this. It's, you know, I'm just the one that said, hey, you guys should do this. And
that's awesome.
I'm on the official fun team, though I don't know about talent. I don't know. Can I tap dance on a Zoom?
it is called the Fun Committee. So that's the official title of this committee. So
these are really good examples. And, you know, what I'm thinking about is like, you know, I'm a musician, you know, so I perform, but, you know, like a talent show doesn't sound like a good idea to me. Like, but I might do it now because I'm in a pandemic, you know, or then Tony says, you know, meditation. And I'm like, I'm not a meditating guy. You know, I need to be, but I'm not. Then I might go, yeah, I'll try it. I'll try anything, you know? So it's like, you know, reach out, push your boundaries. So let's leave it at that for now, in the interest of time. There's a number of, like I said, I'm really using this PowerPoint that'll be shared with you in terms of a resource guide. So we're not going to go through, you know, all parts of this. So, but I do want to show you and point out some sections that you could look at. So Molly Malloy, who is director of Western Montana AHEC and co-director of the Montana Institute for Interprofessional Education, shared some slides with me that you could look at in terms of collective grief and like what to do in terms of trauma and COVID-19. So you could check those out. They kind of complement what we've already gone through. I also found this resource on research on physicians and difficulties in COVID. So we'll share that actual article with you, but there were some takeaways there too. So I don't know if we have, I don't think we have medical providers with us right now, but you know, these are things that are related to public health that could be helpful. And the main findings are here that you can look at. But what I'd like to do with the short time that we have remaining is to go over just first the elements of what a trauma-informed system is, and then finish up with some recommendations from the American Psychological Association on how to promote resilience. And then we'll have time for one more breakout for kind of action planning, next steps, dreaming big, or, you know, what's something you can do today. And then we'll be done. So, wow. All right. This went faster than I thought. So, all right, we're being resilient. Good. So I gave you the definition of a trauma-informed system before. This is from SAMHSA. We also can share that either link, or we can download the document, Emily, and put that in the shared documents. I can certainly do that. They talk about the 3 E's of trauma events. So there has to be some kind of a potentially traumatizing event. There has to be an experience, and then the effects. So I think we're hopefully learning today that what we're going through in the pandemic really is nothing short of at least small t traumatic. It is more than positive stress. It's not. It's maybe tolerable, and at times it might be toxic. So in terms of trauma, this relates to some of the things we talked about in secondary traumatic stress. SAMHSA points out the 4 R's of trauma. So realization, recognizing, responding, and resisting re-traumatization. So these are 4 things that your organization needs to do to become trauma-informed. Realization, recognition, response, and resisting re-traumatization. There are 6 key principles that SAMHSA points out as essential for an organization to be trauma-informed. So those of us that are from the university might think about, is this the case at the University of Montana? Do we feel safe? Is there safety for us and our students and others on campus? There needs to be trustworthiness and transparency throughout the organization. Is there peer support? There needs to be collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice, and choice. And we need to respect cultural, historical, and gender issues. So specifically now looking at the need for anti-racist policies to be throughout our organization is paramount. And we're doing that at the School of Social Work. So those are the 6 key principles. And then, so how do you take the 4 R's, the definition of trauma, the key principles, and how do you put them into action? These 10 domains. You need to make sure that your organization is covering every element of these domains to become trauma-informed. Is it addressing governance and leadership? What type of leadership do you have in your organization? Is it egalitarian? Do people get input, or is it authoritarian? These things need to become policy such that they're institutionalized. We need to look at the physical environment that we work in. Is it welcoming to people who may have experienced trauma? And remember, I shared with you that 70% of us on the call have likely experienced some kind of a traumatic event in our life. There needs to be engagement and involvement. There has to be cross-sector collaboration. And we must screen, assess, and there has to be access to treatment services, either through health insurance or, say, an equal opportunity or employee assistance program. There should be training and workforce development. An example of that is what our colleagues, Alexis, Emily, and Tony are providing for us with trainings like this throughout the semester. Progress monitoring, quality assurance, going back in the Plan, Do, Study, Act process, always assessing if we're effective, This is a huge one. Finance, budgets. Put your money where your mouth is. So if you want to be trauma informed, our budget ought to reflect that that's the case. Oftentimes it doesn't. And then finally, evaluation to make sure we are effective. Okay. So finally, before we do our last breakout, 10 ways from the American Psychological Association to build resilience. So ending on an up note, and then we'll do our exercise. And I won't read these to you. If you're on the call, I'm sure you can read, so you can do that later. But the first way is to make connections. The next is to avoid seeing crises as insurmountable problems. They're not. We can get through them. I would add that there are already things that I'm seeing changing at the university in my school that are positive. And we will come out of this resilient, meaning that we have learned how to be better than we were before the pandemic. Accept that change is a part of life. Move towards your goals incrementally, realizing that we're not going to, obviously, again, with the federal non-response that we've had, we are not going to make the goals as fast as we want. So what can we do here in Missoula, wherever you are in Montana, within your organization, to make sure that we incrementally work towards the goal of beating this thing? Taking decisive actions. I would argue that we need in a pandemic to be nothing short of audacious. So we need to make bold decisions. Look for opportunities in self-discovery. Nurture a positive new view of yourself. You know, I just said, hey, I might be willing to try meditation. All right, that wasn't Jim before the pandemic. Keep things in perspective. Try to maintain optimism as much as you can. Take care of yourself, like we've talked about today. And there's some additional ways that are brought here too. The key is to identify ways that are likely to work well for you as part of your own personal strategy for fostering resilience. So take everything that I've talked about over the last 3.5 hours, chew it up and make it your own, and think about what it is that you need and what your organization needs to be able to do this. Okay, so let's take another 10 minutes, Emily. And the final group activity, I would just like you to brainstorm with your group major takeaways from today, and what are your next steps. And I think it's important to recognize that, you know, one of the comments that was made, wow, I've never really thought of trauma as related to COVID-19 and pandemic. So this is new for some people, and that's okay. So if this is the first baby step of trying to work out what you're going to do next, what are your major takeaways? What other trainings might you want our colleagues in the training center to provide? And what are your next steps that you're going to use going back to your organization? So we'll do a short report out. I never keep my students late. It's a pet peeve of mine. You will not be kept late here. So, okay, 10 minutes. Okay, so just some ideas. Any of you. So either groups or just individuals. Major takeaways from today, next steps, and we'll wrap up with that.
This is Sue Hansen. I guess I can start in saying that not all the material is new to me, but it was really good to focus on it again and understand the importance of it. My major takeaway was to actually, that self-care part of it is actually scheduling things into our schedule for not just me, but my staff. I don't have that many staff, and that we follow through with it, because we talk about it and then we don't follow through with it. And I think we really need to do that to help us, because we're a small health department and we are in that cynical stage. I was telling the other gal, it's like when we start swearing, we know it's bad. We don't usually swear at work, and we're swearing at work and we're negative, and we just need to find a way to get out of that and to think a little bit more optimistically and what can we do to get to that point. So I appreciate that.
So Sue, it sounds like you're a supervisor?
Yeah, I'm the public health director for Beaverhead County.
Awesome. Yeah. So it's so heartening to me to hear a supervisor say those things. And I also want to just recognize that, you know, we do the best we can, and, you know, that normal reaction to abnormal circumstances. So yeah, we try to, but yeah, do that please, and give yourself grace at the same time, because supervisors need support too. So
yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Others?
I think my group was really taken away that there was a lot of terminology that, you know, you can identify that something's happening, but just being able to associate it with correct terminology so that it can be communicated easier is very helpful. And I think we were all kind of looking for, like, which is maybe next steps of just ideas of what others are doing, and like success stories of how people are implementing kind of I guess resiliency in their workplace, and how maybe just like ideas, like I know earlier in the year there was like statewide step counter or something, but like something as a group to try and encourage everyone to get outside, because it seemed like exercise for just about everyone was something that made people just feel better in general.
Thank you for that. That's sounds great. And I love the idea. Well, first off, you know, I hope you see the connection between what we're experiencing in our neurobiology. So it's real. You know, this type of thing is impacting our brains, which is a good part of who we are, you know. So and then also the idea of yeah, what's next? It would be great if there was some kind of informal network that could be formed from the training center or otherwise, where people got together and were able to share success stories, because it's hard to see. You know, I work in child welfare a lot. I work in public schools, and, you know, there's a lot of like, oh, we just can't do it. And then I get to say, well, I was at a school in Poplar and I saw them doing it. So it's like, we need to, yeah, share those success stories. Others? Okay. Well, you know, I hope that that there's been some takeaways that you've had. You know, I really respect your time. You know, I know it's really difficult. Sure was for me to notch out 4 hours in the pandemic to do something like this. So I appreciate your time with that, and I hope that these materials can be useful to you. If you have questions, I realize I neglected to not put my contact information on any of my slides. So Emily will be sending out my email, and if there's anything I can do to support your organization moving forward with this, love to hear from you. So, and Emily, you had evaluations, right?
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I will be sending out a lot of materials, a link to this recording, and Jim's contact information so you can get a hold of him. In the chat box, I've put a link to our Qualtrics evaluation. We really appreciate if you just take a second and fill that out. It helps us keep providing quality trainings and give feedback to Jim as well. It will also be in the email I send out. So thank you for that. Feel free to reach out to any of us if you have questions, and thanks for attending.
Thank you, Emily and Alexis and Tony, for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you guys are doing this. We need this type of thing in our state more than ever. So thank you.
Awesome. Have a good one, everyone.